These words of Jesus hit us right in the heart. There is a tenderness to them, words spoken in love to Jesus' disciples. But there is also a challenge in them. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Our gospel comes to us from what Christians call the Last Supper. Jesus is sharing the Passover meal with his disciples in Jerusalem. Meals are by nature quite intimate. We don't just eat with anyone. But this meal, this last meal, is charged with the reality of the coming crucifixion. That it is a last meal with Jesus is something that only he knows. Yesterday, I was at a workshop hosted by the Bishops' Committee on Healing. The influence of the pandemic restrictions on healing ministries cast a shadow over our conversations. A participant asked a paramedic, "What spiritual comfort did you offer to a person when you loaded them into your ambulance, knowing that it might be the last time they saw their family members?" A tough question, but understandable since hospitals were closed to family members. The pandemic cried. I think many of us in the room got misty-eyed too. Separation and isolation have been one of the cruelest things about how the pandemic changed our life. We've had some lasts, and we didn't know it at the time, but we know it now. And that is exactly why our gospel is of such comfort to us today. The disciples had their last meal. They didn't know it at the time, but when they did know, they remember what Jesus said, "I will not leave you orphaned. I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." They remembered that Jesus, even in his absence, promised his presence, found in the Spirit of truth, the advocate, or what St. John records as the paraclete. Today I want to take up answering how Jesus promises not to leave us orphaned in three ways. First, by asking, what does he mean by a paraclete? Second, by asking, what is the role of the paraclete? And third, by asking, why does the Bible always lead us back to commands? So my first point, what is a paraclete? Paraclete is one of those words that causes Bible translators to tear their hair out. For us, as readers of the Bible, paraclete is a word that has lost its meaning in the passage of time. Our Pew Bibles try to help us by opting for advocate. Other Bibles prefer comforter. Some note that paraclete has a juridical meaning, but some other interpretations can be made too. Scholar Raymond Brown suggests that the uniqueness of the title paraclete is a good thing. For Brown, because no one single translation can capture the entirety of paraclete, we are forced to preserve the uniqueness of the title and accept that it points to several different meanings. In the end, Brown settles for an interpretation of paraclete that is quite simple. The paraclete carries on the earthly work of Jesus after he has been raised up to heaven. In Jesus, God was with us in an explicitly physical way: a son, a carpenter, a teacher, a man who walked the roads of Galilee, a man who prayed in the temple courts of Jerusalem, a man who lived as one of us. The Paraclete is also God with us, but not as a physical being, but the invisible indwelling of the presence of Jesus in us. The Paraclete is the presence of Jesus that abides in us so that we will never be orphans. Through the Paraclete in us, the mission of God begun in Jesus will continue. Jesus, God with us, was not a moment 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem. Jesus, the Paraclete, is God with us now and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. My second point. What is the role of the Paraclete in the life of a Christian? Because the Paraclete is the presence of Jesus in a Christian, its role is to continue the earthly work of Jesus in our times. The Paraclete does for us today what Jesus did for the disciples when he was with them long ago. The Paraclete is our teacher and guide in the words and ways of Jesus, just as he taught his disciples. The Paraclete is our consoler, taking the place of Jesus as our comforter, as he comforted his disciples during his ministry. The Paraclete is our witness in defense of Jesus, a spokesman for us in the context of those who oppose the gospel, just as Jesus defended himself against his opponents during his life. That helps us to understand the tricky bit in our gospel about how the world cannot receive the Paraclete. In John's gospel, Jesus' opponents do not know him because even though they see, they do not believe. In short, those who cannot accept the earthly presence of Jesus cannot accept the indwelling presence of Jesus in the Paraclete. Lastly, the Paraclete will be sent by God, just as God sent Jesus for us, so that we might know that Jesus is in the Father, and we in him, and he in us. The role of the Paraclete is to lead us to understand all the ways in which the indwelling presence of Jesus continues to lead us on our life's journey. My third point. Why does the Bible always lead us back to commands? If you love me, you will keep my commandments. According to St. John, communion with God is expressed by observing the commandments. On Mount Sinai, God makes a covenant with those who love him and keep his commandments. And in Genesis, the first book in the Bible, we read that God created people and gave them a commandment immediately. Enjoy every tree in the garden, but this one, do not eat from it. But commandments can seem burdensome. They don't fit very well with the liberty of our age. And we can ask ourselves, why does God speak to us in commands? Well, paradoxical though it may seem, commandments affirm our freedom. Through the 10 Commandments, God invites us to make choices that are sometimes difficult because we know we have idols that we cherish before God or things that we covet in our heart, and it's not always easy to tell the truth or honor our parents. But God gives us this freedom to choose how we respond to his commandments, because our free response, whatever it may be, matters to God more than correct behavior. The freedom to choose creates at the center of the human experience a space where the choice to follow commandments must be made by love. There is no other way to keep God's commandments but to love God for giving them, and to trust that in loving them we will find ourselves living in God's love. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Our gospel is showing us that love and keeping commandments are two different sides of the same way of life. Love motivates the keeping of the commandments, and love is the substance of Jesus' commandments. In commenting on this passage, St. Augustine writes, "Love separates the saints from the world." In our life, there are times when we are distant from our loved ones, when our lasts feel long ago, and we know that some lasts might end up being forever. In these moments, these final words of Jesus give us hope. We are reminded that what Christians are being asked to do has not changed. Jesus is inviting us to love, and keep his commandments. And to remember that when we do that, we will know and see Jesus' indwelling presence in the Paraclete at work in us. An indwelling presence that will teach and guide us in the way of love, that will comfort us in love, that will be our witness of Jesus' way of love. An indwelling presence that will ultimately bring us fully into the love of God and his Son, fully into the Holy Trinity, that communion of love, love, and love. Amen.